we will call the meeting to order at 7:02. So first we'll start with public engagement. If there's anyone from the public that wishes to say anything. Brian, that would be looking predominantly at you at this point. Otherwise, as you know, we tend to run it in an open way. Moving along would be minutes from November 20th. These are in the Dropbox folder that were available. Thank you, Joe, for taking the minutes. The minutes have the date, time, method of the meeting, along with those who were present and statement that all votes were taken by roll call and a summary of the various items. So do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
So Ann's made a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kevin. So Tim, you get to record all of this. Tim is all over it. Excellent. So we've got a motion made and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion on the minutes themselves?
No discussion. But I was trying to get off mute and I couldn't. I was going to offer to take minutes because I haven't for a while. So Tim, I don't know if it's too late to swap, but I would offer if you wanted to take a night off.
Yeah, if you want to, Lucy, that's fine. I'd appreciate it.
I just felt bad because I haven't yet for a while. So
Sounds
I was
good.
like trying so hard and I couldn't unmute myself.
The battle to take minutes. So for those of us that have been on other committees, have you ever seen a battle of this sort? I can truly say the battle of participation, we are winning. So thank you. For those who have served on elected boards, I think that this is a new one, you know, and certainly one that is greatly appreciated. So with that, Lucy, are you taking minutes going forward from this point?
Sure. Yeah,
okay.
I will.
Excellent. So Tim,
I will appreciate cues as reminders of what is the substantive things we want to make sure we have. So
absolutely. So the substantive things are who's present and or absent, the time that the meeting is called to order, which is 7:02, the fact that all votes are by roll call, and that this is a meeting by Zoom. And then otherwise, it's a summary of the topics that we actually discuss. And it does not have to have anything verbatim by people, but it's just the idea is to give someone who reads them an idea of what was discussed at the meeting. And if there was anything that was significant by any person. So as part of the votes taken, it should record who makes the motion and who seconds the motion. So in this case, we have a motion that was actually made by Ann, seconded by Kevin, to approve the minutes of November 20th. So Lucy's up to speed. Tim, you're off the hook. Congratulations. Well done. All I do is smile. That was miraculous. Any other comments on the minutes from November 20th? Otherwise, much thanks for these minutes being taken. Thought that these minutes definitely met the requirements. Once they're approved, I will go ahead and put a footer on them that just states the date they were approved, send them off to the town clerk, as well as Sherry Dalton from the town administrator's office, so that they can get posted to the website. Okay, no further discussion. We'll take a roll call vote in the order in which you appear on my screen. Ann?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Catherine?
Yes.
Lucy?
yes.
And I vote yes, so unanimous. The minutes are approved. I will go ahead and send those off tonight. This brings us over to tonight's topics. So first, as we get started, want to just do a quick apology for not being able to have the last meeting as originally anticipated. It was just due to the craziness of getting the postings and the notices done in time. Wasn't able to get it posted in time, so that's the reason why this meeting got deferred to tonight as opposed to 2 weeks ago. So that was on yours truly. So with that, we're going to start with 2.1 new districts. Unless you'd prefer to start somewhere else, Mark.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to do that. Would you let me share screen?
Sure. There you go. You've got the ability.
All right, I just have to find it now.
Otherwise, if you want me to share them, I can certainly do that as well.
No, I teed them all up. That's okay. Okay, here we go. So, as you know, I've been pecking at these old sections of the bylaw, just trying to straighten them out. I have them all individually done at this point in time, including signs, which I'll send shortly. And my goal is to go through the notes that we've been keeping as we go through these various individual sections and then assemble the first draft of the bylaw. I'd like to get it to you. Oh, I'd hope to get it to you the first of the year. I know we're not meeting again based on the calendar I saw today till February 5th, so that will give you pretty much a month to go through, make sure I got the notes right, and begin thinking about how we're going to sell this, if you will, to the key groups in town, because it'll start getting refined after that. It'll be easy for us to, create corrected drafts. And I always like to have a workshop session. Perhaps we could start thinking about a schedule for that. So I didn't change much on districts. This is just renumbered. You can see that I've grouped them according to residence, business, industrial. The amendments in the municipal district were unchanged. There's I guess I should ask the question, do you prefer this to be the format for Mass General laws? Lawyers use G period, L period. Lay people tend to use MGL. I don't care. I just want to have it the same every time.
It varies throughout the bylaws. Most of them do have M.G.L. as they were written by Attorney Mullen, and he prefers the more lawyerly format.
So the more lawyerly format is the form that the courts use, and that would just be G period, L period. But I've seen it M period, G period, L period. I just want to, not a big choice. I just want to make sure it's uniform.
I would do the MGL with the periods, just to keep
Okay.
it consistent. I think that's what you see often in court documents.
Very good. Hearing no objection, that's what we'll do. Again, just fixing up the districts. You can see that the key thing that I've deleted here is the purpose of the districts. I don't think this is terribly useful. In fact, I think it's damaging. For example, if I'm arguing with somebody and I read the industrial district and uses permitted are primarily light industrial, which should not have detrimental environmental impacts on a primarily residential community, I might not think that it belongs in the industrial district if it did have arguable detrimental impacts, even though the table says I can do it. So rather than encourage that kind of nitpicking, what I always tell people is that the purpose of the district is contained very succinctly in the use table, because it tells you what the uses are that are allowed by special permit and prohibited, and in the dimensional table, because it tells you how big the lot has to be with the frontage, building height limitations. That's the purpose of the district.
Mark, question, should we add that? Should we just put that in parentheses and say, let me go, go see use table?
I don't know that you need to say that. If these things are deleted, then it won't. There is a purpose section up front in the beginning of the bylaw in section 1, and that contains general purposes. These are district purposes. I guess I could introduce the use table by saying the use table is a succinct reflection of the uses and dimensional characteristics of permitted, specially permitted and prohibited uses. It's a sentence. I can easily add that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just a question to throw it out there. I don't know.
Well, we're going to come to another section. I'm going to stop sharing this for 1 second and go to another share. So this is the introduction to the use table. Can you see that? It should say 3.0 on the top.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting really good at the screen share thing. So here we've got, just some general things to introduce the use table. It's going to fall off a cliff right here, right? Because the use table is going to be inserted right there.
Mhm.
But this is pretty much what you had in your old bylaw. I could say the table of use right there. I could say the table of use regulations in concert with the table of dimensional regulations describes the uses available in each zoning district listed in section 2.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts. It seemed crazy just to delete a whole bunch of stuff like that. That was going to be my first question, why you deleted all that stuff. But
Yeah, I've been to too many evenings out when somebody says, "Well, that's not the purpose of the business district,"
Mhm.
and the purpose of the district is exactly. It actually says this in 3.1.1 already. It's the purpose and intent to list those uses which are specifically allowed or specifically prohibited in the various zoning districts.
As I look at
Yeah.
the text itself that is being replaced, I think that it was created over time as districts were added, especially overlay districts and other districts. And you can see that with when that language got added to this section. And where this is a full recodification, I agree with Attorney Bobrowski's assessment that for anything that is current in the current bylaws, it should be self-explanatory from the uses as defined itself. But I think that understanding some of the basis behind it is there. I am curious, Attorney McGrail, if you've got any thoughts on this, because I know that you've had to have a lot of the discussions around different pieces here, and you've seen a lot of the different zoning pieces as well. So if you've got input here, definitely interested in what that is. And if you've got thoughts, you've got the floor.
I like actually getting rid of all that language because I agree with Mark when he said that someone can latch on to something that we don't necessarily need in there. So putting in that clause in 3.1.2 seems to provide more cover for us, is my intent, my feeling.
In my
And you wanna-
thinking, in my thinking is things like the assisted living overlay facility, as it's currently worded, it actually is a bit limiting in some ways, just because it specifically talks about, the special overlay to distinguish it from assisted living, and the definitions have actually been modified since this district has actually been put in place. Just the way that assisted living is understood and used within the area. So that's why I'm all in favor of simplifying it.
Okay, so I'm gonna then indicate that I should probably indicate something about need to comply with dimensional regulations here as well.
I just want to note for Lucy, as you're taking minutes, if you can note that Eric joined us at 7:16. When members leave or add, they have to get noted as to their time. Eric, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna add something to the effect that I described earlier. The purpose of I think it probably would go better in districts than it does here. Let me go back to there. Where did districts go? Ah, there it is. So why don't I say here in districts? Oh, okay, well, kind of do. All of the above, this is yours, this is not me. All of the above districts are shown in the zoning map. See the table of use regulations and the table of dimensional regulations for detailed requirements within each district. Thus constituting, something to the effect of the purposes and the dimensional characteristics within the district. So I can add that right there, and I think it takes care of the problem.
Attorney McGrail, do you have any thoughts on this issue? Again, I'm particularly curious as I know this is something that you've been a part of the discussions on a lot of these districts being added over the years.
My comment is well done, Mark.
Okay, so I'm gonna add here. District.
And Eric, there's some background noise. If you have the ability to tap mute, that would be helpful when you're not speaking.
Oops. I think that takes care of the issue.
My only question, if I could just insert, Mr. Chair, the next sentence, I don't think there is any unzoned land in the towns. Is there a need for that sentence? Is that?
I don't, it's very rare that a town has unzoned land these days, so
Just
I can pop that out if you don't have any.
I don't believe we've got any unzoned land. I think we've got land that's zoned multiple times with
yes.
overlays, more overlays, and then some overlays on top of that.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to go down past these deleted sections and then show you the list I've made of the overlay and special districts, including these. And these are, for the most part, they're all going into the Section 9 list of overlays and special districts. I think wireless needs to be added here as well. I can't remember if wireless went from being an overlay to being a thing, or whether it was a thing and it became an overlay, but we'll catch up with it. It's on the list tonight. Let me just add that there as a reminder to myself. Then there's a reference to the zoning map. If we're planning to make a new zoning map, I'll just change the date. But it's not a part of any of the work that I've anticipated. These are the freestanding overlay districts that are not shown on the basic map, zoning map. So wireless has its own map, mixed use, signage, overlay, Wakefield municipal building reuse, and assisted living overlay district have their own maps. The boundaries.
Do we need a placeholder for the MBTA? Is that something we should just deal with if it gets passed?
That's something we would add as it gets passed. Is that going to be a on the map district, or is it going to be an overlay district?
Thought it was overlay, right?
Yeah, it can be an overlay, Joe. Yep.
All right.
All right, let me make a note to that effect too, just so we don't forget.
And that is just as an FYI, it is generating a substantial amount of discussion within the town.
As it is everywhere.
And a lot of the discussion seems to be coming in three areas within Wakefield. One is the discussion, which seems to be pretty consistent as to whether the state should do it or not. That's kind of a theory type of discussion, and people tend to fall in one or the other. The other areas is the way that it has been worded in Wakefield is more expansive than the minimum requirements and whether that's appropriate or not. And that's a second area. And then the third area is actually whether it is needed to be covered by both stations within the town or not. And again, similar to the second area, as to how much, what type of relief by the wording should be implemented. I think that that's from what I've heard, those are the three core areas. I'm trying to simplify it in a way that makes sense.
And what is your total obligation? How many new units do you need to make?
I don't know the answer to that offhand.
Um,
Joe, Kevin, do either of you know?
Not off the top of my head. I don't recall the exact number.
I've got something that will tell me. When we have a second, I'll look it up.
I think it was, they had a slideshow for us a few months back. I think it was in that packet, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So I think it's like 1,700. Does that make sense?
Sounds about right, yeah. If you've got 2 train stations, that sounds about right. We're doing the same thing here. We've got 2 train stations as well. So I don't know what our total obligation is either, but it's probably over 1,000. And it's the same thing. We're getting a lot of 1, 2, 3. What Dan said. So it's pretty much the same everywhere. Lexington's already adopted theirs, so I think they're the first ones. My 40R, also MBTA, was adopted by Grafton back in November, early November. Those are the 2 that I know of that are on the map now. And in Grafton, it'll actually lead to a building permit shortly because it was a 40R and it's got a private proponent ready to go. It's vacant land right next to the train station, so there's no sense to wait around. Boundaries, disputes, and split lots are in your existing zoning, so that stuff didn't change. So hearing nothing more about districts, I'm going to save this file, give it today's date, and go to the next one. So the next one, if I remember correctly, if somebody's looking at the agenda, you can help me out.
Next one is miscellaneous uses.
Okay.
333.
This is really short.
I tried to basically do it for the most part in the order that the files were provided.
Oh, okay.
Numerically.
I think we talked about this before. This is something in chapter 48, section 9. And it's been there for a long time. And it talks about accessory uses out of a home related to scientific research or scientific development. And it doesn't come into play very often. I only know of one famous story about a guy who's down in Kingston and he had his house bulldozed by the town when he was at the hospital taking care of his son. It wasn't a happy story, but he got $4 million. Seasonal sale, all of these are things you have today. Seasonal sale of home produce. And this allows for folks who raise too much zucchini, it looks like, to put it on their lawn in these 2 districts. Private swimming pools, looks like a carefully thought through swimming pool regulation. Parking in residence districts, again, these are things that are just grouped together. parking of commercial vehicles in residence districts. Unusual to see this kind of thing. I often talk with towns about what they want to do. I believe some towns have set limits, gross vehicle weight limits of 12,000 to 15,000 pounds, and anything over of that would have to go through some sort of a special permit process, or it would actually be prohibited. But I'm not going to disturb this compromise unless you've already had trouble with it.
Mark, real quick, is that, does that have anything to do with overnight parking, or is it during the day, or both, or?
You know, it's usually overnight parking.
Didn't
and
say
it-
anything.
It's, you know, if it's not, I've only seen it as overnight parking. Yours doesn't limit it to overnight parking.
So we don't have to add anything there for overnight?
Yeah, I mean, if you come home for lunch, you know, why can't you park your commercial vehicle there?
Or if
You
there's
know,
work being done, I'm thinking we've a lot of, especially landscapers and so forth, they've a lot of large vehicles, they do get parked. We don't want that to,
No, I understand that but do we want to just specify that it's only for overnight parking, not for, does that matter?
yeah, that would go right there.
That's all, yeah. Thank you.
Any objection?
I have a question, Joe. If we just limit it to overnight parking, does that, I'm looking at 4. Would this allow a commercial, someone's commercial vehicle to be parked in front of their house during the day? I'm just.
Well, that just states that like a contractor can park there during the day, they just can't leave it there overnight. That's what I was trying to kind of
Right.
get at.
I'm just thinking of if you own, as opposed to a contractor, if the owner has a commercial vehicle, this allows them to park it on their property, but still not in front. Okay, that's fine.
Also, I usually see an exception for people who do overnight parking within a residential district if it's in an enclosed garage.
Yeah,
That's fine.
Do you want me to add that?
I think the less we change for parking, anything touching parking, the better. Eric, did you need to say something? You just have to click the unmute button. Should be in the lower left corner.
would you want people to have their commercial vehicles in garage if it's overnight? Like, I mean, a lot of neighbors don't want to see trucks.
Right.
So you,
That's why this usually applies to overnight outside parking in the driveway or in the side yard, or, you know, nobody wants to see that if it's over a certain size.
Yeah.
You go to smaller towns, they're bringing home 18-wheelers. Seriously, I'm not joking. They're bringing home 18-wheelers.
yeah, that's why you would kind of need that.
Not to mention
finite
school
unit.
buses. It's very common. People generally don't like it. So should I add that number 5 there? Overnight parking within an enclosed garage is permissible?
I wouldn't I would not add that. Just because again, parking is such a
Yeah.
lightning rod issue here.
Right.
To the point where the current town council is having meetings that last hours talking about whether to potentially in the future remove, change parking on a body that they cannot have an impact on.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's how much of a lightning rod it is. Eric, I believe you wanted to say something.
There was a case about 30, 40 years ago. The son of a couple would sell sandwiches, you know, at noontime. And so he would park his truck in the driveway overnight. And when it was parked there during the daytime, it blocked the view of the neighbors from their front window, living room window. And so there was a complaint there, and it seemed that this was against the bylaws, and the people against whom the complaint was made, okay, enforce the bylaw throughout the town. And that would generated a lot of comment. Anyway, so it's a live issue.
Well, I'm always all about discretion instead of valor, so let's just move on. And I'll save this as well.
So this may seem like a minor issue. Is the definition of a commercial vehicle specified in the definitions?
I don't know, I have to look. I don't have that file teed up. I didn't pull up the old bylaw either, so. I can certainly find that out.
It is, Dan.
Okay.
Yeah. Says any vehicle which is a weight or curb weight of more than 6,000 pounds. And it goes on to different types. So it's pretty detailed.
I think it usually has lettering on it.
All right, is the next one, I'm gonna get rid of this file, hang on. Is the next one performance standards, Dan?
The next one is parking and loading, keeping on the parking topic,
Okay, I just saw that one.
6.1.
Yeah. Okay. So a bigger section, not, much has changed here. Again, don't get thrown off by these. These are just my later cross references. When I see that, I'll go check out with a handheld copy of the old bylaw, get the right section, see where it is in the new bylaw, and I'll be putting that in there. Table of required parking spaces. Nothing jumped out at me here as being unusual. The thing I always like to see is flexibility built into the parking provisions, so that if I've got something that needs a little TLC, and I can make it work without putting a lot of asphalt down, there's an opportunity to do that. So again, nothing's changed here so far.
Mark, have you seen any changing in the parking when it, in respects of closeness to the MBTA, like lessening the parking at all, or is that, we don't really want to go there, do we?
Well, that's lessening the parking is going to lead to greater congestion at the train station on the street. I know I did some work in Andover's Shawsheen district many years ago. It was allowing multifamily, 2 parking spaces for each unit, regardless of the size of the unit. And we actually had a special permit application for a new building, and it was denied solely on the basis that even though there was parking pursuant and consistent with the regulations, they were worried that when people came home for lunch, they would add to the congestion on the street. And the court defended that as a valid reason for denial.
Okay.
So you've got a provision here on exemptions and things like that. More importantly, exceptions for the business district. I usually like to have a general provision at the very end that says parking regulations can be subject to a special permit that would be granted if the applicant can show that a change in the parking requirement will not result in substantial detriment to the neighborhood. And it's not just limited to the number of spaces, it's limited to the it applies to everything. It applies to screening regulations, it applies to the location of the parking spaces, it applies to required setbacks, any of these other subsections. And the reason I've done that, and it's probably in about 30 or 40 towns now, is that if I can't comply or don't want to comply with the parking regulations, I need a variance. And the variance has to be subject to soil conditions, shape, or topography. And a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's just a better idea. And if it's a better idea that works, and you don't end up with as much asphalt, or you could, for example, require the parking spaces to be held in reserve but not paved over. A lot of towns do that. I'm not sure I like that idea all the time. Then you end up with some more flexibility, that's all. And I do that with regard to parking, signs, landscaping, and you're going to see in a minute performance standards, because I like zoning that creates win-win situations, not just, oh, I can't do that because this is blocking me from doing it. I mean, I like to give people the opportunity to say, okay, the table of uses prescribes that I have 100 spaces, but the nature of my business is that I'm not going to have more than 30 cars in the lot ever. So why should I pave 70 spaces that I'm never going to need? I'm not going to get a variance for that because I'm not entitled to it. And it's really a jump ball special permit test. I know that's a big leap forward, but you've got some of these things buried in here already. When you talk about parking for small businesses, getting a break, when you talk about parking in the business district, getting a break, I'm talking about these two provisions right here. So I think it's a major change, but I think it's something that could be considered. And this is actually
just to be clear, are you recommending the Board of Appeals have the ability to change the parking requirements for upon request and application for any parcel in any zone? I just want to make sure I'm understanding with the language that you're proposing.
Generally, what I do in order to promote one-stop shopping is say if it needs a special permit, the deviation on parking can be granted as a second special permit by the special permit granting authority. If it only needs site plan approval, then the deviation on parking can be granted by the planning board in the site plan approval process, because in most towns, it is the planning board. So I don't want people to have to go to 3 boards or 2 boards. If they're at one already, they can ask that board for the parking deviation. Doesn't have to be that way, but I think, again, I'm trying to create win-win situations, and paying multiple fees and having multiple hearings for the same project is not flexible. It's too rigid.
So if I can, again, Attorney McGrail, as one of the preeminent zoning related attorneys in town, you've dealt with this, I know, more than probably any other attorney. How has this been addressed within the town in your experience?
Well, I agree with Mark. Right now, we allow that in our business district, as Mark points out. And, so for example, we've had projects in the industrial district, which is, a lot of that's down in Audubon Road. And, if they can't meet the parking requirements, why wouldn't they should be able to do it via special permit to change it, especially an area like that doesn't have a lot of impact.
Yeah, you could almost take this 6.1.6 and delete the reference to the business district and then open it up town-wide, and you'd have what you need.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever really going to become applicable anyways in the residential districts. But it might become applicable in the residential districts with the MBTA.
Yeah,
that's where I was going with this, is that it's the increased density where there will be pushback. In the industrial districts, I agree that I don't see this as being problematic. But again, parking being such a third rail in this community, to the point where we actually had what we sometimes call garage wars over parking. And that was from something 10 years ago and still going on in terms of references. I'd be reluctant to make a significant change to the allowance or disallowance of parking in a significant way that will impact people, particularly as it relates to density in the residential areas. So I think that we may want to expand it from just the business district to being a singular district. And it may be that there is an overlay that allows for additional parking, or in some way that it's referenced that way, that may be a little bit more palatable for the town meeting.
Well, remember, you've got back in the district provision that we talked about, which I stupidly deleted already. Oh, there it is. You've got this grouping. So why not say that this special permit relief can be had in the business districts, plural,
Yes.
and in the industrial districts, plural, and that would give you all of these districts that would now get the availability of parking relief. And then later on, whatever happens with MBTA, you might even begin to encroach into these districts, or a special MBTA district if it's going to be added. And I think that's a good idea.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add, it's what Mark is proposing is very practical.
I'm in
useful.
agreement. I think making it the business districts and industrial districts won't be problematic for a town meeting. I think as soon as it touches the residential districts, it'll be touching that third rail for us politically.
It probably is gonna come back on the residential districts because at the planning board meeting, the last planning board meeting that I was at, that they discussed the MBTA, they talked about the parking. And I think there's gonna be consideration to give relief for parking on that district, because otherwise, it was pointed out, there'll be a concern that people will put buildings on podiums to park underneath them to be able to meet the parking for the 4 units in that MBTA district. So it might be more practical to give them opportunity for relief from parking instead of having to get architecturally creative that would really have a negative impact on some of the residential districts, the way the buildings are gonna be designed. But that's for another day. That's still a discussion, Mr. Chair, that the planning board is having on that, and they haven't figured that out yet.
Thank
So
you. I appreciate that. And I tend to agree that let's let the planning board handle that one before we have to. That may end
so
up
I would
being
I would make this change,
2027 recapitulation.
exception for business districts, and then I would list all of the ones, or I think there's 6 or 7, just so that there's no confusion. And I guess you'd keep the municipal district too, so I would add that as well. Put it up in the caption here too. You know, we're just floating boats here to some extent. If this riles up the masses in the first rollout of the first draft, then there are ways to delete that too. So do you want to try to float this?
I think that as long as we keep it out of the residential districts, I think it will go without a problem.
Okay.
Few people will point it out, but I don't think it will be considered problematic.
Okay.
Where people will point it out is the mixed use that we're seeing predominantly in the business districts. And this will allow for that relief, which is consistent with everything that I've seen from the town at a large scale, with the intent of doing the multi-use buildings and so forth. So this seems to be consistent with the various views that the town has had, again, without being the point of trying to tell people what they can and can't do on their own individually owned personal property.
All right, as we scroll down, this is a very it's a nice thought, but this has gotten increasingly less practical. 500 feet is the recommendation that I would give you. Because if you're going to have location of spaces, and 200 feet is very close, but this kind of reflects the notion that people aren't as healthy as they used to be, or people are now healthier than they used to be. 500 feet is nothing. If you found a space in Boston that was 500 feet away from where you were going, you'd grab it.
Any objections to changing that? Otherwise, that seems to be a type of recodification that makes sense, just with the updates.
Sorry, we're saying changing it from 500 to 200 or 200 to 500.
No, it's 200
500.
up, 200 up to 500.
Okay, thanks.
Let me just make a note to myself that I don't forget it if we have to go back and fix it at some point. Okay.
Can I just ask you a question on that? Brian, you may know this. When all the complaints about the parking, were happening post garage, the municipal lot next to the omelet factory was presented as a lot that employees could use. But that's more than 500 feet from a lot of the businesses that we were suggesting. Do we have to limit it to 500 feet?
I think you'd want to do a special permit after that. And this, when it says things like Board of Appeals may permit off-street parking,
Yeah.
does that mean by special permit?
It has
Okay.
been, you're deleting that requirement. Because the first sentence says same lot or off lot by special permit.
Okay, so let me just add. May grant a special permit. You're right, I deleted that in the caption.
Okay.
Okay, that's just.
Before we get too far down, I had a question in the parking spaces table.
Yeah.
For bowling alleys, it says 2 per bowling alley. Should that be 2 per lane?
It's the same thing, I think. So should I put bowling lane or lane?
I think either way works. To me, it just seemed like bowling alley is the whole building.
Okay,
That's a good point.
And for what it's worth, we do have one at this point kind of famous bowling alley in town. It's
okay.
been featured in quite a few movies lately.
So this required parking space size is pretty small for a guy who drives a 4Runner, and I've had 6. Because I have a boat. So 9 feet by 18 feet. It's moved instead to, the largest pickup truck now commercially available on the market is over 21 feet long. They just keep getting bigger.
The official MUTCD, I believe, is 10 feet for width and 20 feet for length.
Yeah.
The traffic advisory committee always recommends 9 by 18.
Yeah, I won't park in that space. I mean, my lot holds maybe 250 cars, and there's some spaces, old school spaces for people with cars that they don't want to get dinged up.
I mean, right now we're 9 by 18. If you go to 10, that can have a huge impact on projects.
Yeah, I
Because
always recommend that a certain percentage of them be 9 by 18 for compact.
we've always had 9 by 18 as standard. I mean, never had an issue with it.
Okay.
I tend to agree. My initial thinking is because this is the minimum, I think that if we designate that, a particular owner can certainly increase those without a problem. But I think if
Okay.
we mandate an increase, it could become problematic.
All right.
Again, the less changes we make to parking issues, the better. Because the factions in town that tend to be that parking is a huge problem or parking is not a problem, and seems to be very little in between. And we don't want to be in a place where we are trying to advocate one way or the other, as opposed to saying this is just a recodification that we believe is in the best interest of the town. That's the approach that I'm trying to take on this. So
Mhm.
others are welcome to put their 2 cents in or more on this topic.
Under the driveway section I've got scrolled up here, there's just a blank. I'm assuming that's the Board of Appeals?
It has been.
Okay, let's just add it. Common driveways, nothing's changed. Loading spaces, nothing's changed, so that's that. So I think that's a great step forward to do the flexibility in those 7 districts, which I'll list now in 6.1.6. And I get the whole thing about the residential districts, but that'll make for some flexibility.
6.15 for a minute.
Hang on,
I just want to point something out to you.
6.15.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you look at this, it's relating to existing non-conforming uses in buildings.
Mhm.
So 1 and 2 makes sense, but if you go to number 3, the way that's always been interpreted is it can be for, that's for any business, even a new business.
Uh-huh.
And it makes sense because it's really for the downtown area that when new little stores go in, if they don't meet the parking, if they're small and they're under, where our requirement for retail is 1 for every 250 square feet.
Yeah,
Sometimes you have a lot of small businesses that are like 800 square feet.
yeah, and they're just
Saves
gonna
them the
rely on
time to have to
on-street
go to the
parking.
zoning board for like a special permit or a variance, but I just think number 3 should be a separate section. Like a 6.1,
Yeah, they're not really non-conformities as the caption here indicates.
yeah. So I mean, 1 and 2, it just needs to be separate because it's really
Uh,
confusing.
Sidewalk cafes would also want to join it, right?
Yep.
So where can we put this? I think maybe we put it in the preamble up here. Maybe we put exceptions here right at the top. And then we dump that. And then we go back down and we get the sidewalk cafe thing, which doesn't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
And we just put it in here as an exception. And renumber it later.
Yeah.
Okay. That works. All right, so I'm gonna save this again. That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Very helpful.
All right, so now I'm going to go to performance standards. I've been waiting to talk about this with you for a while.
Do we get to see you dance? Oh, wrong type of performance. Sorry.
All right, so you do have these very limited performance standards today, and they're, really so old that I don't, the open display of junk. Obviously, nobody can have a solid waste landfill under state law. And then you've got open display storage of junk. These are things that could just go into the use table. And what I've given you is something that years ago, I got called by the town of Westford, and the new people were angry with the old planning board members because their sense of things was that things weren't spelled out and protected well enough. So the assistant town manager, who's now town manager in Hopkinton, called me up and said, can you come up with a compromise document that would make it clear. Most bylaws just have parking signs, and if you're lucky, landscaping. I mean, they don't really go beyond that. And all of these other things are important for this stuff as well. So this is the idea here is that when you apply for site plan approval, you're going to get introduced to lighting, noise, site preparation, utility connections, traffic, and I suppose you could go even as far as architecture. And instead of just saying minimize this and maximize that, you've actually got some objective standards here that people have to comply with. So the lighting standards, none of this is rocket science. You're trying to reduce light pollution, light trespass, conserve energy, and preserve the night sky. So we're going to shield, that means cut off luminaires, no overspill or glare, that's pretty much the same thing, and no up into the sky. Light intensity is going to be regulated. Illuminated surfaces would tend to be accomplished by the minimum amount of light necessary. Searchlights, go home, please. We don't want these anymore. Indoor lighting doesn't get to go outside. I did a trial recently on an 85,000 square foot R&D facility in Watertown, and the neighbor kept saying, well, that's going to be a giant, 10-story lantern in the nighttime. Well, not if you put in automatically closing electronic curtains that kick in at dusk. Now the building can be lit, but it also is protecting the neighbors. And a lot of this is just, you can obviously play with this if you like pole mounted fixtures to be 24 feet or 18 feet. There's nothing magical about that number. And the lighting also should be adjusted so that there's minimum lighting, except for security lighting at night, and the thing just doesn't glare off into the 3 a.m., 4 a.m. window. Noise, similar common sense things. There is a state noise standard out of the Air Quality Division at the DEP, and that is in 310 CMR 7.10, and it's 10 dBA above ambient as measured at the property line of the receiving use. And it's for source point generators of noise. So it's rooftop HVAC equipment. It could be truck noise at a terminal, but it's not a lawnmower. That's transient noise, and it wouldn't be included. In order to get that kind of noise, you would set hours of limitation for what happens outside the scope of the DEP regulation. So loading, unloading, opening, closing, 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. is not going to cause noise pollution. Tools or equipment between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. aren't going to be operated so you cross a noise pollution. And operation of construction devices like compressors, jackhammers, bulldozers are not going to be operated in a condition that sponsors noise pollution. And that's essentially common sense rules about noise. The next one is site preparation, site development. Again, common sense rules. Don't disturb more than you're going to need. If you're taking down too much vegetation, we can ask you to replicate it. If you're clearing for utility trenching, just clear the minimum area necessary. Put the site together in a way that makes sense. If you hit, if you hit something when you're digging, you've got to comply with the Mass Historical Commission regulations. Keep existing vegetation rather than offer to plant new vegetation. Revegetate where necessary. Limit clearing so that you're not creating erosion and sedimentation out onto the street. Finished grade gets put into a condition where it's not going to leak or bleed. Topsoil, irrigation, phasing of development. Those are common sense rules on site preparation. And again, there's nothing necessarily magical about these. You can almost treat it like a sushi menu. And if you don't like some of these things, you just leave it out. This is the pedestrian and vehicular traffic regulations. We had the Medford city engineer, who's a traffic engineer, update these just recently within the last 18 months. So I'm confident that this is in pretty good shape. But essentially what you want to do is prescribe performance standards for driveways, curb cuts, and then you get into the traffic. So transportation plan approval, that's going to be a traffic study prepared by a qualified traffic engineer for anything over 25,000 square feet. And there are standards for what is called a TIAS, both in the ITE trip generation materials, and DEP has its own, or DOT has its own regulations for a TIAS. And it's as a part of that, you would put a TDM together, a transportation demand management plan. And that's talking about how you can mitigate, but more importantly, create incentives for employees not to drive to work. So provide shuttle services, carpools, van pools, rail passes, monetary incentives, on-site shower for people who want to ride their bike to work or at lunchtime, other techniques, all of which can be folded in. The parking can be reduced. We've got a reference there to this section. I think that's going to be 6.1.6. Let me just make a note there. Levels of maintenance or improvement. LOS is a measurement of the delay at an intersection or stop sign, and it generally increases when a new project is being constructed. So you want to see that the level of service does not result in a service rating of D or less, or if it's going to cause the loss of one letter grade. D is acceptable. When you get down to E and F, it's a fairly big delay. Then you want to be able to see whether or not mitigation can be provided. Same thing with dangerous intersections, which are usually identified as crash data in a TIAS. You want to make sure there's sight distance so that when you're turning right or left out of the driveway, you don't pull in front of somebody and you leave them adequate sight stopping distance. And then maximum parking. Yeah, you can build it as big as you want as long as you meet the minimum, but we want to talk about a really big parking lot. We just passed the last, the day when all mall parking lots are built for. It's roughly around December 10th. And when you drive by Burlington or Linfield, you'll see the parking lot 50% empty on any other day. Mitigation, pedestrian and bicycle safety, all of these are just sound things to discuss with the applicant. And then the last one here is aesthetic standards and utilities. So I didn't get too much into the architectural standards. I use generic phrases like harmony and scale, bulk massing and density, and utilities obviously have to comply with local standards. Now these are designed, fiscal standards as well. These are designed to be applicable to anything. Let me just scoot back up to the top here. So the idea here is that these are applicable to any commercial or multifamily use. So applicants for special permits or site plan approval for non-residential or multifamily uses shall comply. Non-residential or multifamily shall mean any use with a dwelling, a six unit or better, a multifamily. And I think with small uses possible, you might want to put some sort of threshold in here. Instead of saying any non-residential use, you might want to say over 2,500 square feet or over 5,000 square feet of gross floor area. Just flag that. But that's the nature of the beast here. So when this goes to site plan review, you're not just looking at traffic and signs, you're looking at all of these things. And the special permit or the site plan granting authority can ask them, to give you essentially a complete description rather than a partial description of the project so that it can be holistically designed. The good news is that this would come out. This is from an old, I think I gave you the actual Medford bylaw, so this would come out. But essentially what you would also say is that there's a waiver possible for these standards. And in the course of granting the special permit or site plan approval, you can grant a waiver where such waiver does not derogate from the purposes of the section because it'll work. In Medford, they call it the Community Development Board. So I plugged Medford's in this list of things to you. And it's the last time it's been revised. This goes back probably 15 years, but Medford, which is a very progressive community, I found, I think did a good job of upgrading this just recently.
So a couple of things that immediately jumped out at me. The
Yep.
concept I think is really good to make it objective and to allow for the ability to request deviation through the ZBA. So that way there has to be a discussion and so forth. So one of the things that immediately comes up is what you identified, any non-commercial use, because we do have, or non-residential use, we do have non-residential uses in a lot of different areas. Because depending upon what we're discussing, we could call home offices non-residential use and things along those lines. So I think
Yeah.
that specifying some sort of objective minimum makes sense. We have exceptions. We recently passed the ability to have art uses in accessory buildings, and those are for non-residential use.
Yeah.
So that, I think that makes sense. The other piece is you mentioned less than 6 units. Most of the rest of the bylaw, I believe, references less than 4 units. So 4 or
Right.
less is considered to be considered to be small. 5 or more tends to be considered large. The other piece, just as you were going through, piqued my interest, and I just don't know the feasibility in Wakefield, was the utilities all being underground.
Hmm.
Because there are a lot of areas where the utilities are not available from the utility provider underground.
Yeah, you can't do it.
Okay. Well, that's easy enough to fix. I mean, to the extent feasible, they'll be underground. If they're not, you don't have to.
Otherwise, I think putting the expectation to move utilities underground, especially given the weather that we saw today, that was quite frightful, that would be helpful. Where it is feasible. That way, you don't get someone trying to do a development keeping everything above ground when it could go underground. It requires justification, and at least brings up the discussion to the Board of Appeals. That's my 2 cents. Thoughts from others?
Mr. Chair, could I add something on that?
Absolutely.
Just, I think this is gonna have to be really vetted with other town departments.
Yes,
Because
that's
there's
what we
a
did in
lot-
Medford.
Yeah, there's a lot of conflicting things in here for like for example, the Department of Public Works has stormwater management's their own stormwater bylaw.
Yep.
Some of the stuff I quickly saw in here contradicts it. And the fire department. And we have another example is we have our own noise ordinance in town.
Yep.
And so I think some of this might be redundant because I think our noise bylaw is actually more strict than what's in here. And it will be conflicting. So I just think it needs to really be looked at by all departments to make sure that what's going to be put in here doesn't conflict with it. That's all.
Okay.
And Mark, is this different than the special permit standards? Is this?
Yes, this is design. This is actually the design standards that you have to comply with in order to be eligible for the special permit, unless a waiver is granted.
Yeah, these really have, I mean, I want to read them in more detail. I haven't seen this before. So, and you know, I know there's going to be vetting, but I haven't had a chance to go through it. There's a lot here.
Yeah, so this is, Medford had basically what you have now, which is no pollution, nothing radioactive, please, that kind of thing. And we threw it on the table there. They have a city engineer, they have a traffic engineer as well, as do some of the larger cities. And what you see is their very thorough review under the Medford ordinance. Obviously, you'd have to go through the same process. But too often the site plan regulations say, when you ask, what do they want me to do? It's minimize this or maximize that. And what does that mean? Minimize the degree to which your lights bother other people. Well, can we get a little bit more clear about that? How might they bother other people? What would the standard be in order to prevent them from bothering other people? And it's a lot to buy. I'll give you that. So I do think it's going to take a special group of you and a special assembly of your department members, DPW, police department, maybe even fire, to take a look at this with us and make sure that we've got something that's applicable directly to you. But if you want to go forward with it, I'm happy to do that. Because literally what you have now for performance standards is this. These things that I struck out. With the exception of your parking and signage. Landscaping tends to apply mostly to parking, especially in a bigger operation. So you kind of got that. There's a very nice section on landscaping parking lots. This is not the kind of thing you're going to say tonight, hey, that's great, Mark, let's include it.
No.
So, right. So remember I said at the end of the last meeting, you really have to read this closely. But I like the approach. And I think the larger the community, the better you off are. You're better off with this than without it.
Mr. Chair, can we get a copy of this? Is this?
Certainly, this will get posted. I wanted to have a discussion of it first, so that before posting an initial draft, just knowing that there would be discussion around it.
Sure. I mean, I just want to read it in detail. That's all.
Yeah. Well, let me resend it to the chairman, and because there's some Medford specific things that I've deleted. And I've taken them out already. So let me cull through it, and I'll send it tomorrow if I can do that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And if you can also take a look to see, as Attorney McGrail was pointing out, there are some places that might be in conflict with other parts of the bylaws. If you're able to do a keyword search or other things for at least the topics to see if it strikes you as being in conflict, that would be helpful.
Okay. All right. With that said, I'm going to save this.
I just get concerned with limiting flexibility with it. Like, for example, the height of the poles. I mean, Joe knows this on the zoning board. Depending on the project, sometimes the zoning board wants the poles high and sometimes they want them short. Depends on where it is and what the nature of the project is. So
Well, there'd be nothing to prevent that, but there are certainly some industry prescriptions for 20 feet is not going to bother anybody and it's still going to work. So if it needs to be 24, it needs to be 24. If you can get away with 16, why not get away with 16? Okay, I'm going to send that out again, and you're going to look at it even more closely next time. What's after performance standards, Mr. Chairman?
After performance standards is affordability.
Okay, I didn't change much of this.
Let's keep it cheap.
Okay. So this is your inclusionary provision. And I always look to see whether or not you've tried to apply this to subdivisions, because that would be illegal under the current thinking. The first thing that jumped out at me is, why do you need a site approval letter from a subsidizing agency if it's not going to be a 40B? That's a project eligibility letter, also a site. It's functionally a site approval letter. is the ticket to go to the ZBA and apply. You can't do it without it, and apply for a 40B. But why do you need one otherwise? There needs to be a use restriction or a regulatory agreement at the end of the day. And I suppose this is a pre-approval letter from the subsidizing agency. I mean, you could go to DHCD and say, which is now EOHLC, and say, if we did this, would you approve it? But, you know, that's about as far as that goes, I think. So why don't I just change that to at least require a consult with EOHLC? You don't want to be disappointed. If you do these projects on the zoning side of things, then generally speaking, they're what's called LIP units only, which means that only the units that are subsidized are going to count on the SHI, unless the number of units in a building that you're doing by special permit exceed 25% of the total units in a rental project. So let me just clean this up. You've got an 18% minimum requirement. How'd you come up with that? I mean, I'm working right now in Maynard on a project for a developer, and he's got a range of options. He could go up to 36 units, or he could keep it as low as 16 units. At 16 units, he only needs to do 12% affordable. That would be 2 units. At 20, he needs to do 15% affordable. That would be 3 units. And by the time you get up to 36 units, he needs to do 25% affordable. And that would be 9 units. So it provides some flexibility and allows for greater flexibility in people choosing to do this. Remember, if they want to avoid it, they probably can. So I just wondered if there was some flexibility in that 18%. Remember, the more units you have, the greater internal subsidy you can provide.
So, Joe, you've said also on the ZBA, and I know that there have been at least 2 recent decisions that the chair of the ZBA made as declarations that I forget the name of the act that's being invoked to try and prevent the 40Bs.
Yeah.
And so given that, do you think that this is something, if we were to change this to be a more formulaic, that it would have any impact to either increase compliance and reduce the need to go into a more contentious type of discussion?
I don't know the answer to that question. I myself don't know where the 18% came from. It's always been there since I've been on, but I've only been on 4 years. So I guess it's been like that forever, right? I mean, I don't know where that number came from.
Have you had, how many projects have you had under this provision generally, if you can collectively recall?
It used to be 12%. It started at 12%. And then it was amended to 18%. Is Mark, are you suggesting it's too high?
You know, the idea here is that you're trying to get what you want to get, which is affordable units, but not scare them into doing 40B, because for 7% more, I can tell you to take these regulations and you know what.
Yeah, it's never, I can tell you, it went from 12 to 18. I know the history on this.
Yeah.
And initially it was designed just to kind of keep up with the 10%, because when you're adding these units, we didn't want to go backwards in our SHI count. So they wanted 12%. And then then the planning board increased it to 18% to try to have the goal to make an impact on the SHI to really, get closer to that 10%.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we've never had a problem with 18%.
And how many projects would you say you've had?
A good number,
Okay,
yeah.
well,
And it's been successful. I mean, you know, you would think as a developers council, I would be advocating to reduce that.
mhm.
But candidly, it hasn't been an issue. I mean, I've represented a number of clients that have not balked at that number.
Okay,
I mean, I'm being honest about that. We've had a lot of success with that project. And I think it's been good for the town because it's really gotten us close to that 10% goal.
yeah.
And we're almost there now. And those projects at 18% have had a significant impact in getting us there.
And these are all lip unit only, right?
Yes, Mark.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I don't see why you need a site approval letter. I think you probably would want to say that the applicant shall have a conversation with the subsidizing agency because eventually they're going to have to put a regulatory agreement in place. But it's not it's not a requirement that you come in with this.
Yeah, that
And
should be there.
I don't even know if they give them out.
They don't, Mark. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, they have to if it's 40B. It's called a project eligibility letter. And you can get it from Mass Housing, from Mass Housing Development. You can get it from Mass Housing Partnership Fund and DHCD. Well, I keep kidding. I'm going to say that till I die, Brian. It's over you. So, what is this EOHLC stuff? It's DHCD. Come on.
I know.
All right, so this is in pretty good shape. I mean, that's the bottom line. I'm going to tweak this a little bit. All right, what's next?
So next up, we have the attached dwelling overlay district.
Yeah, I saw this like in the provisions right after the OSD. So I guess my first question is this a part of the OSD or is this its own freestanding provision? Do you have any of these things? Let me show you why I'm confused here. Hang on. No, I gotta get the old bylaw first. All right, I'm going back in to dig out your old bylaw.
It's part of 19093, the open space development is where it seems to be initially discussed. Section I.
Yeah, so that's the question I had. So here's the old zoning. And where was it, Dan?
It's 190-93I.
So we're just sailing along here.
There it is. You just
Yeah, but
dispensed it.
we're sailing along here in the OSD, right? H. And then we come down here and then all of a sudden it goes I, right? So that means it's part of the OSD. Because H was OSD and now this is announcing itself. And I'm like, well, is it freestanding or is it part of the OSD? Open space development, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
The part that's confusing to at least me is it in number 1 where it says all provisions of the underlying districts shall continue to apply. So that's where it just as to whether it seems like this is really just a general overlay district. It's just more of where the definition lies.
Yeah.
That's my interpretation of it.
Do you
But
have
this is not
anything
my
that's
special-
ever been approved under the attached dwelling overlay district?
Never. It's never been used, Mark.
Yeah. Because I mean, you can see what I'm saying here, right? I just went all the way down to H, and I'm still clunking along in the OSD. And now you'd expect that to end right here. Instead, it jumps to I. And does it go any further? No, I think I is it. No, J, decision of the planning board. And this is OSD again, right? So it's within the OSD. Now, the OSD is not a district, it's a thing. So maybe what this is saying is that as part of the OSD, I can have an attached dwelling overlay district in which obviously attached dwellings are allowed. Is there an attached dwelling district location? Is it on a map?
No.
Let me put this down a little bit and go back to the let me go back to the districts. Remember there was a section in the districts that talked about the map? Okay, so in this list of little maps here. Oh, okay. Well, I probably put that there.
Di?
Municipal district, wireless, mixed use, signage, municipal building, assisted living. Oh, that's assisted living, not attached. So it's not listed as a separate map. Where even is the attached dwelling unit overlay district?
So when that was, I know the history of this, Mr. Chair, I can help.
Sure.
When this was adopted, it was anticipated that at some point that district might be created, Mark, but it doesn't exist.
Okay.
It's not on a map. Just created the opportunity for that to potentially happen. If somebody saw an area that they wanted to do it, they could present at a pre-application with the planning board, and then that overlay district would be created, but you're not gonna find it on a map.
Okay, so that suggests to me that what I should do then is I should pull that piece, I, out of the OSD and move J up to I. Hearing no objection. What's next?
Next is the FPOD.
This is your floodplain district.
Seems appropriate for today.
Yeah. We had about 4 inches of rain over here. All right. So everybody's got a floodplain district. And it's one of your, it's probably the most standard resource protecting overlay districts. And it's all based on FEMA and firm flood insurance rate maps. And there's certain velocity zones, and those are the things listed on these panels. And basically within the FPOD, you have to follow regulations that are set out by FEMA. This is all driven by FEMA. So these things are generally sent to the towns. I believe there was just another round a year or not more than that ago. And FEMA is telling you that in zones A and E along water courses, the best available federal, state, blah, 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 blah. So this is, you didn't make this up. FEMA made it up.
So just out of curiosity, when I see things that are that specific in regulation, should it have language that allows for successor type of documentation, especially where that documentation is 13 plus years old?
Yeah, so the stuff would be as may be amended, but that's really kind of a floating zone problem if you do that. So I think the best thing to do is to say, you know, to amend it periodically when FEMA sends you something new. Because if you change or create a district administratively without going through the niceties of town meeting, it's called a floating zone, and it's one of the few things that's clearly illegal in the inconsistency provisions of Chapter 40A, which tells you you can't do that. I think it's in Section 3.
Okay, again, I'm just trying to make it so that as a non-lawyer, if it says, you know, something like as may be amended or something, so that when there is an update, while it may be legally enforceable because it came from FEMA, it would be very easy to get overlooked for many years before these get updated. That's the reason for that I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, well, your Concom agent at a minimum ought to be on the job and be quick to send this over to the other less technical people in zoning world, like building commissioner, so that everybody knows there's new FEMA communication that's been received and you have to upgrade the map. Otherwise, to upgrade the map without a town meeting vote is to create a floating zone that was administratively created by agency fiat rather than town meeting vote. You can't do that.
Okay.
Otherwise, this is just, you know, congratulations. You have a pretty updated floodplain map. And then there's references to other bodies of regulation, site plan approval. And this is very boilerplate. Looks like everybody else's floodplain overlay district. Nothing here that's much of a variation on the theme. It is what it is. What do we got next?
Any discussion by anyone on that? Next is the RMD.
All right.
With three items left.
Okay. Oh, registered marijuana. This is, I'm sure, a recent compromise. Well, so this is the medical component, and I mean, you've got all the core ingredients here of medical. Special permit, hours of operation, incident reports. Obviously, you've got things in here to enforce security, a 5-year lapse provision. This is for the medical dispensary side of marijuana, cannabis. I can't remember. Do you have an adult provision? Have you got cannabis shops in town?
Not at
adult-
the moment.
Okay, that would be the next thing.
We were among I think we were actually the test case for our prohibition, and ultimately we lost the case, as I recall. But there
Were
have
you
not
one
been
of the
any
ones the Attorney General's office threw out?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. It was Burlington and Wakefield, wasn't it?
We
Yeah.
asked for advice. I also, but there is something, and I think it's certainly less. Did we update it? Because it was quite restrictive even after the Attorney General threw it out.
Did you had a moratorium at first, right?
Correct.
That's
We had
what
a
they threw out.
moratorium,
Yeah.
and then we limited it to a really very small part of the town.
Yeah,
But I think there's been chatter that even that could be changed.
yeah. This is your location provision that you got on the screen. So schools, you're 500 feet from a school, childcare,
Mm-hmm.
minor gathering locations, drug and alcohol, group homes, halfway houses, any other RMD. That's pretty typical. When have you ever seen an adult use bylaw? You want to
We
see
have an
one?
we have an adult.
Yeah.
We have an adult use bylaw,
Okay,
and both of them are in the same district, which I believe is the limited industrial,
okay. I'm just gonna
which is
look.
a very small section. There's only a couple of parcels that qualify.
I'm just gonna dig out I want to see that I know that you have this here.
It's 19024 is the current one.
Okay. So I've got new.
And we don't have any known adult use establishments in town.
But you have a bylaw for it.
We have a bylaw to limit the attractiveness.
Okay. Well, did you vote yes or no on the referendum years ago? For recreational?
As a town,
Yeah.
the town voted yes overall.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't see anything that I've recodified as being an adult bylaw, a recreational bylaw. So what I'm going to do is make a note to show you a recreational bylaw from a responsible community that's thought it through. And, we can talk about getting killed by town meeting together. See whether we want to do that. Okay, what's the next one we've got?
Next is the uses.
We kind of looked at that already. That's just the introduction to the use table.
Okay. And the last one is wireless.
Yeah, why am I confused about whether, so this is either an overlay district or not. If it's not an overlay, well, I limit the siting of wireless communication facilities to the overlay to the extent permitted by law, because even if you have an overlay district, the case law in Massachusetts has evolved to prevent gaps in coverage to the extent your overlay district doesn't allow the gap to be filled. So under the Federal Telecommunications Act, you can't discriminate between carriers, which rarely happens. But more importantly, you can't prohibit wireless telecommunication in town. The case law through a Lincoln case years ago evolved because they had a wireless overlay district and they said, oh no, you've got to go there. Well, there were gaps on Route 2 at Tracy's, if you know where I'm talking about, that couldn't be filled from the overlay district due to the limitations in technology. And Lincoln persisted, saying that's not a prohibition. We allow you to go to the wireless overlay district. And the court said that if the wireless overlay district didn't allow for coverage, it was a prohibition and it was impermissible under the federal law. So I can, even if I'm not in the, even if you have a gap in coverage and I don't propose to locate in the overlay district, you have to give me a variance under federal law. And the variance criteria are not those for a variance. They're criteria that are shaped by the federal law, which means there's no such thing as a Massachusetts variance for this. That's probably about a 15-year-old case at this point. So when you say, I don't know where your wireless communications overlay district is, did I see it back? I keep having to go back to that little section on districts. Is it in here? Well, it says you've got one shown on a separate map dated May 2011. So I don't know where that is. I think I went online to see whether I could find it. Did I find it is the question. No, I didn't find it. I just saved it. So can anybody dig this out?
I did find a copy on the website. There's a supplemental zoning
Okay.
document with all the districts.
Okay.
And it
Yeah,
basically.
I saw that it had like 5 maps on it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, all right, I just don't have that. I'll go back and look for that again. So having said that, the deal is that this is an overlay district. That's the one thing I was confused about. Is it an overlay district or not? Apparently it is. Wrong file.
Is this still a material issue for a lot of towns?
It depends. I mean, my town council is Anderson and Krieger, and Steve Anderson was very involved in the wireless industry. And so when there was a fight here in Concord, his firm had to disqualify itself.
And I
Yeah.
mention that just because if we go back about 10 years, this was definitely a different issue than it is now.
Yeah, I'd
Because
say you're right.
and that's where I'm just trying to figure out, is it needed to even have this
Yeah.
as an overlay at all?
Well, I think that's a very good question, because if you're not letting me fill gaps in coverage from the overlay district, I get to ignore the sentence that I added here, which says everything will be in the overlay district to the extent permitted by law. So there really isn't such a thing as a mandate under federal law that your towers can only be in the district. Because if that doesn't work, I can apply for a variance, and the law now says I can get that variance to be outside the district.
Brian, are you aware whether this has been used at all?
Oh, yeah, it's been used, and Mark's right. I'm trying to think. We had a case in Wakefield where someone actually did go to they went to federal court, Mark,
Yeah.
and they,
Was that for the one that's in the church?
no, where was it? I don't even know if it ended up getting built, but they went to, I think it was, you know what? I think it was the one in the church. Yeah, the one in the church, Dan, down by the Dalbia School.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. And then I think they settled it and I think they settled the case, but it was gonna get overturned. Mark's right, because they did exactly that. They went and had experts and proved that there was nowhere within the district that they could get the coverage that they needed.
Yeah.
And so. But everybody's right on this. It has been used. It hasn't been used in a while. It's less of an issue than it was. But I think it's still potentially an issue, depending.
Do you have coverage? Like in my downtown,
For
we
the
have no
most,
coverage.
so for the most part, the town has good coverage. And I say that
Okay.
because there are some dead zones
Yeah.
in the town, and I'm just trying to figure out if having this overlay district is actually protecting the town from anything, as opposed to creating an impediment. If it's protecting us from having additional towers, just because someone wants to sell, sell space, if that's an active issue, I have no problems with it. I just am all in favor of getting rid of things that are not needed.
I think what it does is it kind of guides the companies of where you want it.
Yeah.
And, and they try to, my experience with those companies, Mark, is they try to take the path of least resistance. So,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
if they can get the local approval, they'd rather do that, because for them to go to court is a pain in the neck and time consuming and monetary impact. So if you don't have it, Mr. Chair, then I think now you're creating a problem, because you might, they might see an opportunity, you might end up with them going everywhere.
Yeah, I litigated a case for my zoning board, but I was just mostly a passive attendee. It was between I can't remember the name of the tower company, a big one. And they had a fixture on a chimney at Middlesex School, and the chimney came down because of school expansion plans. The lease from the school specified that only other certain locations could be replacement spots, and it moved it closer to a residential neighborhood, and they sued. And I think the setback was supposed to be 1,000 feet, and it ended up being 600 feet. And at the end of the day, this is a federally protected activity. So if it can't be 1,000 feet, and this is the only place where the school is going to allow it, it can be 600 feet, and the neighbors, they ultimately took some money and went away.
Prince Bell does a lot of this stuff, don't they, Mark?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I work with them on a case, and I just remember that they said, well, we can get this approved in federal court, but we'd rather not. They really don't want to do that.
Right. Everybody tries to go along and get along on this.
So that's where I think your bylaw really helps.
Most of the anger expressed over wireless communication facilities are expressed on cell phones. So. Think about it.
And I think about the importance of cell phones, like when the cable went out today, it became the only internet connectivity.
We just had a big fight in the town about whether the wireless district should be extended to the new high school because it had no coverage. Kids were getting sick and they couldn't get their parents.
Not overly surprised. Our high school is the back of the high school is one of the areas that is a known dead zone. The front of the school is just fine for almost all of the carriers.
I can't tell you the number of days that I've tried to make a call and my phone says SOS only here in beautiful West Concord. So
I'd say I'm surprised, but I'm not.
Well, just the FYI, the last 4 years on the board, the only thing that's come across our end is just upgrades. They haven't really new permits, all upgrades.
Yeah, we're a little bit more rural than you are. So, but the downtown is the worst. I mean, it's just horrible. So I think we leave this as is.
Okay.
And, the industry knows the rules. And so they'll tell you quickly enough if they can't fill the gap in coverage and you need to give them some local relief. How many things do we have left to go, Dan? I don't remember.
That's everything.
Not tonight.
I believe that's everything that has been submitted.
Okay, I'll give you the signs. I think I'm up again on your calendar on the 5th of February. Danvers is having their town meeting that night, and they've asked me to come because I drafted a few warrant articles for them. I believe I'm buried in the warrant, so my plan would be to come to Danvers at 7 o'clock, work with them until I get called. I don't remember the warrant article, but it's in the back with the other zoning articles, so I don't expect that it's going to interfere with our time. But and I didn't have that much on their agenda, so if and when I'm called, I might disappear for a half an hour, 15 minutes, and then I'll come back and we'll finish our call that evening. I expect that I'll have the first draft of the bylaw to you, hopefully certainly within the next 2 weeks. Today's the 18th, so right around New Year's, the day after New Year's, something like that, which gives everybody ample time to spend some time with it.
Otherwise,
think
stay warm.
Yeah, well, I'm actually taking off in January. It's funny you said that, to Antarctica. So
That's why I'm saying it.
yeah,
It is, especially coming from a nice warm place like Massachusetts.
yeah. Well, I think the average temperature on the peninsula in Antarctica in the week I'm going, 2 weeks I'm going, is 36 to 38.
What it used to be here. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, with that, so next meeting date is currently planned to be February 5th. If there is the possibility for an earlier date, we're certainly open to that, but otherwise the first and third Mondays in February and January are both holidays. That's the reason why I pushed it off to February. So wasn't sure of the committee's thoughts. If we want to possibly try for a Tuesday meeting.
It would make sense to me if you all, without me, because I'm not going to have service, but went through those performance standards with a fine-tooth comb. And again, treat them like a sushi menu. Just, you don't like it, don't order it.
Once we get those, I think that'll be a good thing to discuss, probably also with the smaller group as well.
Okay.
So just so that we can set up the meetings. If anyone wants to attend, obviously you're welcome to do so. But that way we'll have more representation from the Board of Appeals and the planning board as well. So others' thoughts on that?
I think it sounds like a good idea, Dan.
So February 5th becomes the next meeting, looking at ahead at the calendar.
Dan, can I ask, when you indicated that a lot of those, the sushi menu, we should touch base with other departments?
Yeah.
Is that something that you're going to do? Do you want to, send that out to folks or delegate?
Once we get it, I will send it. I'll post it and recommend to the town administrator that it gets circulated to all of the departments that handle anything to do with real property.
Do you have a town engineer, or do you have a consulting firm that you use?
We have a town engineer, and I believe we also use consulting firms as needed.
Okay.
We have an engineering department.
Okay.
They're very good.
Yeah.
So we'll also want to figure out the meeting after the February 5th, because it turns out that the third Monday in February happens to also be a holiday. The third Monday in February is President's Day. So we may want to consider doing a shift. We can have that discussion by email and or at February 5th meeting, just so we don't have to then defer, again, additional weeks. I just want to throw that out there for people to figure out on their calendars as to what may make sense. We otherwise we're looking at one meeting in February, and then we're looking at March, and the first meeting in March would be March 4th. But again, that seems to be a long delay as we're trying to get things done for possible town meeting presentation next year. So the February 5th, I don't think is going to be a problem in and of itself. Others' thoughts?
I have a trial that starts in the land court on the 26th, if that's the day you're looking at. And it's a 3-day trial, so it's not an uncomplicated trial.
The second and fourth Tuesdays tend to be used for, second and fourth Mondays tend to be used by the town council. So I think we'll probably be okay with not doing a Monday. It would probably have to be some other day of the week.
Oh, you mean the President's Day holiday?
It,
Yeah,
It
I'm,
would-
I'm
it
open the
could be-
rest of that. I'm open the rest of that week, the 20th, 21st, 22nd. So if you wanted to do it one of those days, that'd be fine.
So I'll send out notes to the committee. We can determine that part offline.
Yeah, if I'm in trial after a 10-hour day, I'm not gonna be very good. And then I gotta do it Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of the 26th, 7th, and 8th.
If you're on trial, you're gonna want to focus on the trial and
I'm-
everything that you need to do.
Yeah, I'm too old not to focus on the trial, so.
You may not want to, but yeah, that's different issue.
Probably gonna
Okay.
be my last trial, so it'll be interesting.
So otherwise, we've got some upcoming holidays. We've got Christmas on December 25th. We've got Kwanzaa on Tuesday, December 26th. Following Monday, first Monday, of course, of the new year is New Year's Day. January 1st, Martin Luther King Day is January 15th. That's the reason why we're not actually set to meet until February 5th. So it's going to be an adventure for us. We could potentially meet January 29th, which would be the fifth Monday in January, if people wanted to consider that as well. So that's another option to potentially have two meetings fairly close. So thoughts?
I can do that if you want. I'll be done with my trial on Wednesday. But it's up to you.
So I'm seeing some head nods. I think that to plan for that also gives us, if there's weather problems or whatever, we should have 2 dates in that time period is not a bad idea. So we will set up the next meeting for January 29th. And prior to that, we'll go ahead and send out the revisions once we get those from you to the town administrator. We'll also have them posted to this particular body's website as well.
Great. And I'll be sending you the first draft within a couple of weeks or so.
Sounds good.
Very good.
Any other topics from anyone else? Okay, with that, we have the most exciting vote of the evening coming up, which is,
I'm gonna say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Happy Holidays to everybody, and you can adjourn.
Sounds good. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion made by Ann. Do we have a second?
I second.
Catherine is seconding this. Lucy, you've got all this down because you're the keeper of the minutes this time because you took over for Tim. And I'm not sure if you know to record that Eric left at about 8:56, right? 8:52, somewhere around there before this vote.
Okay.
Just so it's noted as to why he's not participating in this vote itself. Okay, any discussion on the vote to adjourn? Seeing none, we'll do the roll call vote in the order in which you appear on my screen. Ann,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
Catherine,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Lucy,
Yes.
and I will vote in the affirmative. The meeting is adjourned at 9 o'clock sharp. Thank you,